I haven't gotten a chance to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with asymmetrical brown hair, a white robe, and green and multicolored stole this morning. It's good to be with you. "2,585 years ago, in Lumbini, Nepal, near the border of India, Siddhartha Gautama was born, the story goes. Siddhartha, the man who was to become the great teacher known as the Buddha, was born a prince, born into a life of luxury and pleasure, and until his late 20s, he was protected by his parents from witnessing the great suffering of the world. It is said that when he was 29, he made several of these fairly rare journeys for him outside of the palace walls and encountered a sick person and an old person and then a dead body. The first times he had seen the suffering of sickness or old age or death in his life. On one more journey outside the palace walls, he encountered a religious ascetic living a life of self-denial in search of freedom from the cycle of suffering in his life. And Siddhartha decided to give up his privilege and all of his belongings and all of his relationships to follow in this man's footsteps in order to discover the nature of suffering and a path to freedom from suffering for himself. It's said that after about 6 years of this life of deprivation and near starvation, he still had not found that spiritual liberation he was looking for. And so he sat down under a peepal tree, or what is now often called a sacred fig or a Bodhi tree, at a place called Bodh Gaya to meditate, intending to stay in meditation until he found the root of suffering and how to liberate oneself from it. Some traditions say that he had to battle harassment and temptation by the god Mara, demon of illusion, as he meditated. Some say that he simply entered deeper and deeper states of meditation, discovering the truths of the cycle of rebirth and the law of karma and the Four Noble Truths. In each tradition, though, eventually, under that tree, he attained enlightenment, or nirvana, and became known as the Buddha, or the awakened one. After he continued to meditate for a time, eventually he went forth and shared his teachings with the world. So this story might be familiar to you. How many of you are familiar with some part of this story? For many of us, it's familiar, although the outlines of the story vary greatly across the different Buddhisms in the world. And of course, it's an ancient story, so exact details can't be fully known. In Western culture, we tend to speak about Buddhism as one unified religion, but it's more accurate, I think, to speak of it as Buddhisms. Many different traditions and philosophies and religious cultures around the world that share some common threads. And in many of these traditions of Buddhism, the day that Buddha attained enlightenment is said to have happened on the 8th day of the 12th month of the year. And so for many people who use the Western calendar, that means December 8th. December 8th. And December 8th is therefore observed as Bodhi Day in a lot of places, the day that the Buddha became enlightened. And perhaps it's observed by some of you here in the sanctuary, or some of us together here on Zoom, some of us watching it on YouTube. The holiday of Bodhi Day is commemorated simply by most, although it varies. Often it's some additional meditation, some study of the Dharma, chanting of sutras, maybe performing kind acts towards other beings. This year, as the Western calendar's Bodhi Day has approached, it's gotten me thinking about the idea of enlightenment and what it might mean in our lives. Former abbess of the San Francisco Zen Center, Zenke Blanche Hartman, writes, "Each of us has the nature of awakening. Each of us is Buddha. How do we meet it?" she says. How do we become intimate with it and bring it into the world? How do we bring this wisdom and compassion and vision of Buddha into the world with this very body and mind? In other words, the man that most of us know as the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, was a Buddha, not the only Buddha. Each one of us has the capacity within to become a Buddha. Each one of us has the nature of awakening within, the possibility to become an awakened one ourselves. And this is one of the most empowering teachings of Buddhism for me, that enlightenment is not available just to the holy few, just to one ancient being, but the capacity for enlightenment exists within each one of us, each one of us. And it's powerful to me, not just because it sounds cool that any of us could potentially become a Buddha, although that sounds cool, but really the meaning behind that. It means that each one of us has the ability to understand the root of suffering in our lives and to liberate ourselves from the cycle of suffering. So whatever suffering we're experiencing at this moment, whatever suffering you are experiencing at this moment, whatever pain and grief and churning, unsettled feelings are plaguing you, that you have the power to transcend those feelings. We all do. So what the original Buddha taught, following his enlightenment, are these, the Four Noble Truths. The first, that suffering is present in all life. The second, that suffering occurs because of attachment or craving, because we cling to and desire things, but also cling to ideas and visions of ourselves. The third, that suffering can be escaped by letting go of these attachments. And the fourth, that the Eightfold Path is the way to achieve liberation from suffering. And the Eightfold Path consists of 8 practices like right speech and right conduct, right livelihood. In other words, practices around how to live in right relationship with other beings, to stay mindful and engage in the kind of spiritual practice that will deepen our own insight. That's a lot of information, right? And so much of it is familiar to many of you. And maybe more importantly, these teachings are part of a 2,500-year-old tradition that's followed by 400 million people, a tradition which many devote their entire lives to studying and deepening their understanding and practice of the teachings. And so I'm not going to try to cover it all in this one short sermon. Certainly, it shouldn't be done by someone like myself who learns from the teachings of Buddhism, but does not identify as a Buddhist myself. The tiny sliver of the story of the historical Buddha and the meaning of Bodhi Day and enlightenment that I have found myself ruminating on this week and want to explore together this morning is how to connect our own messy and beautiful life paths, our complicated web of relationships and stubborn ways and attachments, which bring love and joy to our living, how to connect all of that to Siddhartha Gautama's finding enlightenment and what enlightenment taught him. Because my friends, I will tell you that though the idea that we could all achieve enlightenment and become a Buddha has always been compelling to me, the reality of what it takes to get there, at least what it took for Siddhartha to get there, to truly relinquish the attachment that causes suffering, has always felt so far out of reach and frankly even undesirable to me that it often leaves me feeling defeated when I face the question of how to deepen my own spirituality in the Buddhist path, or at least disconnected from some of the gifts of Buddhist teachings. And this has become even more true for me since having a child, because it's been said that Siddhartha Gautama had one child that was either conceived or born right around the time when he left his privileged palace life. The stories vary, but somewhere around there. And therefore he named his child Rahula, which means chain or fetter on the path of enlightenment. He named his child fetter on the path, from the path of enlightenment. And though eventually the Buddha came to teach about the middle path, about the way of living in balance, neither extreme luxury or extreme asceticism, for a time at least, he viewed his own child as a chain or something that inhibited him from achieving true spiritual enlightenment. And that might be the only way to find nirvana. I don't know. I'm not a Buddha yet. Probably won't ever make it. But if we leave behind all of the mess of love and connection and nurturing relationships with those around us because they're chains that hold us back from enlightenment, my hunch is that most of us would choose to remain unenlightened 99% of the time. There's definitely that 1% of the time when we say, screw it, and start Googling, where's the nearest Bodhi tree to Philadelphia? But that's usually not like our wisest self talking, right? The truth is that the greatest meaning in most of our lives is found through love, right? Through the love and care of family and friends and mentors who saw us clearly, believed in us, taught us to be good to one another. And through the gift of serving those children and those loved ones who need us to care for them and see them and believe in them. The greatest meaning in most of our lives come from these relationships. And so I yearn for an enlightenment that doesn't see these loving relationships as hindrances to spiritual awakening. I yearn for an enlightenment that sees these loving relationships as part of the path to spiritual awakening, because that's what they've been in my life, and that's what they are to so many of us. And so I return to the words of that Abbess Zenkai Hartman that I spoke of earlier, these central questions in many schools of Buddhism. How do we meet that nature of awakening within ourselves amidst the mess and loving entanglements of our lives? How do we become intimate with that part of our nature and bring it forth in the world, in the real world? How do we access the wisdom and compassion and vision of Buddha within, in a real way, in our own bodies, in our own minds? How do we, messy human beings, move closer to enlightenment? And her answer, Abbess Zenkai Hartman's answer, is this is what our Buddhist practice is about. This is why we must practice. It's about the spiritual practice. So what I take from her words is this, that it's not the purity of the goal of relinquishing attachment to relationships in order to eliminate suffering that should be our focus if we're trying to meet awakening within ourselves. If we want to access the wisdom and compassion and vision of Buddha nature that is within us, our focus should simply be on practicing, on taking one movement towards better practice in our own lives. In Abbess Zenkai Hartman's tradition of Zen Buddhism, this means a simple meditation practice of sitting and breathing and approaching the world with what Zen practitioners call shoshin, or beginner's mind. How many of you are familiar with the idea of beginner's mind? It's like fairly well known in the world these days. So David shared one of the classic Zen koans, or parables, around the idea of beginner's mind earlier, that there was once a Japanese Zen master who was visited by a scholar curious about Zen. And being polite, the master served the scholar a cup of tea as the scholar spoke about all his ideas about Zen. And as he poured, the scholar's cup became full, but the master kept on pouring. And as the scholar watched the cup overflow, he could no longer contain himself, and he said, "It's overfull, no more will go in." The master turned to the scholar and said, "Like the cup, you too are overfull of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" As Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi once said in the prologue to his book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. And so the teaching goes that we should approach the world with an empty cup, to let go of our preconceived notions as much as possible, and approach the world with the curiosity and openness of a beginner, so that we can see those many possibilities that exist before us. Abbess Hartman says that beginner's mind is the mind that's just investigating, open to whatever occurs, curious, seeking, but not with expectation or grasping, just being there and observing and seeing what occurs, being ready for whatever experience arises in the moment. Children enter the world as masters of beginner's mind. And those of us who are adults do well to watch and learn from them as we seek to cultivate beginner's mind in our own lives. One of the greatest gifts of parenthood that I've found thus far, and let's be honest, I'm only 20 months in, so I'm still very new to this, is just simply following the attention of my child and trying to experience the world the way he does. Nova sees ceiling fans as objects of delight and great beauty, transcendent beauty, those ceiling fans. Nova sees each stick that he finds on the ground, and lots of leaves as well, as incredible treasures, worthy of taking a moment to pause and to look and to bend down and to pick up and to show whatever passersby are coming by, and to carry in his little chubby fist until another beautiful treasure comes to his attention and he puts down the first stick and picks up the second. Or usually he tries to pick them all up and then some of them fall. Nova points out motorized wheelchairs when he sees them and says, "Truck!" And there is no higher praise from Nova than to be truck. And now that the sun sets earlier in the evening, Nova gleefully points to the sky at night and shouts, "Moo, moo." Moon is what he means. He sees the moon when I don't. With beginner's mind, Nova sees so much of what I see as a waste, as things of beauty, things to be treasured. With beginner's mind, Nova sees so much of what I take for granted as worthy of pausing and being present to and honoring. With beginner's mind, Nova sees things I was taught to be prejudiced against as things to be praised. And when we in turn adopt beginner's mind, we are working towards relinquishing our attachments, not to those loving relationships, but to those preconceived notions, to our own supposed expertise, our own self-importance, our own ways of being and doing and experiencing that keep us chained to cycles of creating suffering in the world, for ourselves, certainly, sometimes for others. I find that beginner's mind is extra helpful in times of conflict, and most couples therapists will probably tell you this. Those of you who've been in couples therapy like I have, or who are couples therapists yourself. Being curious about another's perspective when you're in the midst of conflict, and then being curious about your perspective in turn, can break through entrenched opinions and old stories and help you find fresh new ground and connection and a new way through conflict. Almost always, it can help you find a new way through. This idea isn't completely owned by Zen Buddhism alone. Our Unitarian forebearer, Henry David Thoreau, called something similar to this idea useful ignorance. He wrote, "A man's ignorance sometimes is not only useful, but beautiful, while his knowledge, so-called, is oftentimes worse than useless, besides being ugly. Which is the best man to deal with," he asks, "he who knows nothing about a subject, which is extremely rare, knows that he knows nothing, or he who really knows something about it but thinks that he knows all." My friends, whether you are one who celebrates Bodhi Day this week or another time of the year, or just simply someone looking to deepen insight in your lives, to move closer to enlightenment in your lives, may you find a way forward through your messy and beautiful tangled web of relationships, where you don't have to relinquish the attachments of love that teach you something beautiful about the world, but where you can see through the eyes of your beloveds something new, something fresh, where you can see with beginner's mind and practice your way one step closer to enlightenment. As you go forth this week, I invite you to slow down, pay attention to the moon and the sticks at your feet, to ceiling fans and new perspectives around you. May each one of us find beginner's mind and practice it. May each one of us get closer in touch with our awakened one within. Amen, and blessed be.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.